When my husband of 43 years passed away, I wasn't sure how I was going to get through the next hour, let alone the next chapter of my life. For the first time in decades, the house felt like an empty box. No humming from the garage, no late-night radio murmuring from the kitchen, just silence. I tried to be strong, kept the curtains open, made tea for one, watered the garden, but grief is a slow flood. It doesn't come crashing in, it seeps through the cracks. That's when my son, Alex, and his wife, Teresa, offered to take me in. "Stay with us as long as you need, Mom," Alex had said, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You shouldn't be alone." At first, it felt like a lifeline. I moved into their guest room in a quiet little neighborhood in Millbrook, a modest suburb with tree-lined streets and kind enough neighbors. Teresa even repainted the room for me. Lavender, my favorite. The first few weeks were comforting. We ate dinner together, watched movies. I helped fold laundry and pick up their kids from school. I was trying to be useful, invisible even. But somewhere around the 6-month mark, things began to shift. The smiles around the dinner table tightened. The warmth in Teresa's voice turned brittle. The conversations got shorter. There were sighs when I left a dish in the sink, quiet muttering when I forgot to turn off a light. One night, as we were finishing dinner, Teresa looked at the electric bill sitting on the counter and let out a sigh that could have shattered glass. "Well," she said, not looking at me, "I guess we are paying for this month's utilities again." Alex didn't say anything, just rubbed his temples. It kept happening. Little jabs, small coldnesses. A cabinet that accidentally got locked. A subtle suggestion that I should maybe start contributing somehow. Then, a week later, Alex walked into my room. He didn't knock. He stood there, eyes avoiding mine, and said, "We've talked about it and we just can't keep covering your expenses. It's too much. We found a place, a nice one. It's a care facility. You'll have your own room, meals, stuff." I stared at him. For a second, I didn't understand the words. Then I did. "You're sending me to a nursing home?" I asked, my voice so thin it hardly sounded like mine. "It's not like that," he said quickly. "You'll be taken care of." So that's what I was now. A burden. A bill. Something to be handled. My blood ran cold. And for the first time since my husband died, I felt truly abandoned. Teresa had done what she always did, made a quick decision with a pretty smile and a perfectly filtered photo on a website. "It's mid-tier," she said, tapping at her laptop screen. "But clean, respectable, not one of those horror story homes." I wasn't asked for an opinion. The following morning, I was packed up like an afterthought. One suitcase, my cane, a ziplock of medications and a folder with my medical notes. Teresa handed them off like checking in luggage. Alex drove in silence. The facility was in the older part of town, tucked behind an abandoned grocery store and a crumbling parking lot. The sign out front read Willow Creek Assisted Living. The word assisted was half faded. As we pulled into the lot, I noticed the paint peeling from the gutters. A screen door flapping loose. The air smelled musty, like something wet had been left too long in the sun. "This is just temporary," Alex mumbled. "Until things stabilize." Things. Stabilize. I wanted to ask what things, but I didn't. He helped me out of the car and into the lobby. The walls were yellowed, and the chairs sagged in the middle. A woman at the front desk gave us a clipboard with intake forms and offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll like it here," she said. We have bingo nights. No one explained how long I'd be there. No one said how often they'd visit. And just like that, my son gave me a stiff hug, mumbled something about traffic, and turned to go. The door closed behind him. No wave, no backward glance. Just gone. And there I was, a stranger in a hallway that smelled of bleach and mildew, holding a single bag and a heart that felt like glass, barely taped together. My room was small. One window, a chipped dresser, a bed with plastic rails. The light flickered when I turned it on. The walls were blank, the air heavy. I sat on the bed, too hard, and tried not to cry. This is my life now, I thought. Not a home, not a family, just four stained walls and the distant sound of someone coughing down the hall. I'd always thought that grief came with funerals, with endings. But this abandonment, it was a living kind of death. They didn't bury me. They just left me here to rot. The room they gave me was small, barely big enough to stretch out my arms without touching something. The walls were yellowed, not by design, but by time. Once white paint now cracked near the ceiling corners. A single bed stood in the middle, low and stiff, with sheets that smelled like detergent and something older underneath. There was a window, but instead of a garden or a quiet street, it faced a grey concrete courtyard. No flowers, no trees, just a rusted bench and a bird feeder that hadn't seen feed in months. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed for what felt like hours, unable to lie down. The silence was heavy, not peaceful, but hollow. Occasionally, a cough echoed down the hall. Once, someone cried out, calling a name that was probably long gone. And me? I wept. Quietly at first. Just tears falling without sound. But then came the sobs, deep, chest-hollowing sobs that shook my frame until I had to bite down on my knuckle just to keep from screaming. I looked around the room, this box I had been placed in, and asked myself the one question that wouldn't stop spinning in my mind. Is this what I deserved? After everything? I had raised my son alone after his father left us. 35 years of scraped knees and night shifts, of ironing school uniforms at 1 a.m. and making boxed macaroni stretch 3 meals. I'd worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices, waiting tables, babysitting other people's kids so Alex could go to college, have a future. I never bought myself anything, never took vacations. I missed weddings, birthdays, my own anniversary to make rent and keep food on our table. And now? I was disposable. A problem to be moved. A cost to be managed. I pressed my head to the window glass, staring into the empty courtyard lit by a flickering lamp. Somewhere, behind another window, another forgotten soul was probably asking the same question I was. Where did it all go wrong? I wasn't sick. I wasn't incapable. I was just inconvenient. And on that first night, in that silent, forgotten room, I mourned not just my husband, but the family I thought I still had. Morning light filtered through the blinds like watered-down hope. I hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out of a restless haze, startled awake by distant noises, the hum of machines, and my own thoughts. I was still sitting upright when I heard the footsteps, not the rushed, squeaky-shoed kind of the nurses, or the slow shuffles of other residents. These were calm, intentional, confident even. A soft knock came, followed by the gentle squeal of the door opening. He stepped in slowly, tall, dressed in an old-fashioned cardigan and slacks, his silver-white hair swept neatly back. His face was lined with age, but not weighed down by it. There was grace in his presence. and kindness in the way he held himself. "Good morning," he said, offering a warm smile. "You must be Mrs. Hartley." I nodded cautiously, clutching the blanket around my lap a little tighter. He stepped forward and extended a hand. "My name's Martin. I run Willow Creek." I hesitated, then placed my hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle, human. Not cold, not procedural, just real. "I like to introduce myself to every new resident," he continued. "I find that the first morning is often the hardest." I tried to smile, but my lips barely moved. I didn't trust my voice. He sat down in the chair across from my bed. Not as an authority, not as someone in charge, but as if to say, "I've got time. I see you." "I know this place doesn't look like much at first glance," he admitted, glancing at the cracked paint and tired furniture. "And I'll be honest, it's not the Ritz. But we do care. Deeply. And you're not alone here." Something about the way he said that cracked something open in me. My throat tightened, and I felt the sting behind my eyes before I could stop it. I wiped at my cheek, embarrassed. But Martin only smiled kindly. "You've been through a lot," he said. "I don't know your story, but I know that look. The how did I get here? Look, let me just say this. Getting older doesn't mean being discarded. Not here. Not while I'm around." He stood, smoothing the creases from his cardigan. "If you ever need anything, conversation, quiet, a walk in the garden, I'm here. Truly." He placed a small note card on the dresser. "Martin Clark, Director Extension, 201. Office down the West Hall, first door on the left." I picked up the card and stared at it long after he'd gone. For the first time since I arrived, the walls didn't feel quite as close. Someone had seen me. And that changed everything. Every Thursday at 3 p.m., Martin hosted a quiet little tea gathering in the sunroom at the end of the West Hall. There was nothing fancy about it. Just two mismatched teapots, a tray of store-bought cookies, and a couple of small round tables draped with faded linens. But it felt intentional, like someone had thought about comfort, even in a place where comfort was in short supply. He invited me once, then twice. By the third time, I had stopped making excuses. The sunroom was lined with dusty windows that overlooked the same grey courtyard my room faced. But in the afternoon light, even that concrete looked softer. Martin always brought the tea himself. Earl Grey or chamomile, depending on his mood. He never pushed conversation, never asked for my story unless I offered pieces of it myself. Instead, he brought a travel-sized chessboard and set it between us. "Play?" he asked gently. I hadn't played in years, but I nodded anyway. Our games were slow, thoughtful. Most turns passed in silence, but between moves we spoke. Not about doctors or painkillers or who didn't visit this week, but about memories. He told me he had lost his wife, Eleanor, 10 years ago. "Lung cancer," he said softly, watching his rook glide across the board. "She went faster than anyone expected. We were married 42 years. Still find myself reaching for her mug in the morning." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. He didn't need words anyway. Then, one afternoon, as we stared out the window and the last of the tea cooled in our cups, he said something I'll never forget. "Some people are tested by money," he murmured. "Others by illness. But the cruelest test of all is loneliness. Because it doesn't show up all at once. It just accumulates." I looked at him, startled. My fingers froze over porn. He didn't look at me, just kept gazing out at the empty courtyard. Loneliness doesn't break you in one clean snap, he continued. It erodes you, quietly. By the time you notice it's killing you, it already has. That stayed with me, more than anything else, because it was true. In the shared silence of two old souls, I found something unexpected. Not joy, not healing, but a fragile kind of recognition. I wasn't the only one still living with ghosts. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to face mine alone. It took a few weeks for me to look up from my own pain, long enough to notice the people around me. At first glance, they looked like anyone else in a place like this. Bodies slowed by time, eyes that had seen too much. But when I started listening, really listening, I realized something. Every single one of them carried a story, and none of those stories were small. Doris, the woman who always wore oversized sunglasses and scarves, had once been a stage actress in New York City. She'd toured with traveling theatre companies in the 70s and knew entire Shakespeare monologues by heart. Sometimes I'd hear her reciting lines to herself in the hallway, her voice still sharp with emotion. Then there was Arthur, soft-spoken, always scribbling in a notebook. He used to be a published poet, had even done readings in Boston years ago. His memory had faded, but his language hadn't. One afternoon, he read me a poem he had written just that morning. It was about a bird landing on a windowsill. I cried and told him it was beautiful. He smiled like it was the first compliment he'd heard in years. Eileen had been a school teacher. Joseph had once owned a record store. Ruth had 5 children who never visited. Each of them was a novel with pages torn out. Some had been forgotten. Others had been discarded. But they were not empty. And then there was Martin. Martin, who knew every resident's name by heart. Martin, who remembered birthdays and brought cake from the grocery store, even if no one else showed up. Martin, who once stopped a visiting nurse in the hallway just to ask her to speak more kindly to a man with dementia because he still hears you, even if he doesn't answer. It was in the way he paused to listen to Arthur's half-formed poems, the way he waited for Doris to finish her dramatic soliloquies, the way he always looked us in the eye when he spoke. In a place the world had chosen to forget, Martin made sure no one disappeared. And slowly, piece by piece, so did we. Not because life had become easier, but because someone reminded us we were still seen. It was a Tuesday, and the air smelled faintly of honeysuckle and old grass. Spring had finally reached Millbrook, and the small tea garden behind Willow Creek had started to bloom. Modestly, but enough to make the air feel gentler somehow. Martin had asked me to join him there after lunch. Just for a little sun, he said casually, but with that glimmer in his eye that always suggested something more. He had set up a small table under the only blooming cherry tree, complete with linen napkins, fresh sliced oranges, and my favorite, chamomile tea with honey. I sat down across from him, smiling in spite of myself. We didn't speak for a while. Just the birds, the breeze, the occasional sound of a far-off screen door squeaking shut. Then, Martin folded his hands and looked at me, not with polite interest or idle friendliness, but with a kind of steady calm that made the whole garden go still. I'm not a man who dances around things, he said. I blinked. That much I've gathered? He smiled softly. Life is short, Evelyn. I think you and I know that better than most. I nodded, unsure where this was going. I've lived a lot of quiet days since Eleanor passed. And I didn't expect anything new. I thought that part of my life was behind me. His eyes searched mine. But then you arrived. And everything got noisy again. In the best way. I laugh more. I think more. I hope more. My breath caught in my throat. Martin leaned slightly forward. Not dramatic, not grand, but honest. I know this isn't what either of us pictured at this stage of our lives. And maybe it's not perfect. But there's a little light left in this world. And I'd like to share it with you. Then with a smile that trembled at the corners, he asked, "Will you marry me?" I couldn't speak. My hands trembled slightly around my teacup. My mind raced back through a lifetime. Through years of sacrifice, loss, loneliness. Through the nights, I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I'd ever feel anything but forgotten again. And now, here he was, offering not salvation, not rescue, but companionship, kindness, a second chance. My heart didn't race. It stopped, just for a beat, then pulsed forward again, fuller than before. "Yes," I whispered. He reached across the table and held my hand. And in the golden hush of that garden, surrounded by blooming life and quiet ghosts, something bloomed in me too. Not youth, not fantasy, but something far rarer. Hope. My first reaction wasn't tears or romance or dramatic gasps. It was laughter. Quiet, stunned, breathless laughter. Not because it was funny, but because it was unbelievable. Because someone like me, grey-haired, displaced, forgotten by her own son, had just been proposed to, in a garden filled with blooming life, by a man who saw me. Really saw me. "Martin?" I said, half laughing, half reeling. "Are you serious?" He chuckled softly. "I may be old, but I'm not senile." I looked down at my tea, then out across the courtyard. A pair of dandelions had broken through the cracks in the pavement. Resilient things. Dandelions. Everyone tried to cut them down, but they found a way back. I mean, I started, struggling to find words. "We're not exactly spring chickens." "That's exactly why I asked now," he said gently. "We don't have time to waste." I shook my head, still smiling. "People will talk." "People always talk," Martin replied, eyes warm. "They talk when you fall, when you rise, when you do nothing, and when you dare to want something for yourself. But choosing joy, choosing to love again at our age, that takes courage." Courage. That word wrapped around my heart like an old scarf I hadn't worn in years. I had been courageous before, raising a child alone, working 3 jobs, burying my husband without letting my voice crack at the funeral. I had stood in the face of loneliness and dared to keep living. So why not now? Why not choose something beautiful, even if the world didn't understand? I looked at Martin. His eyes didn't plead or push. They simply waited, patient, kind, certain. "I never thought I'd be asked again," I whispered. "Neither did I," he said, smiling. "Life has a strange sense of humor." We sat in silence for a moment. The sun dipped behind the edge of the roof. The wind picked up just enough to rustle the leaves above us. And then I nodded. Slowly, deliberately, bravely. "Yes," I said. "Why not?" His fingers brushed mine across the table. In that instant, I wasn't someone's burden. I wasn't someone's leftover responsibility. I was a woman being chosen again. And I chose back. 2 weeks later, we were married. It wasn't in a church. There were no pews or string quartets. No towering cake or overpriced photographers. But it was ours. Martin arranged for the small garden behind Willow Creek, the same one where he'd proposed, to be tidied up. The maintenance staff scrubbed the benches. Doris, the former actress, insisted on choosing the music, a playlist of old jazz and classic piano. Arthur, our poet, wrote a short reading that made half the guests cry and the other half hum with nostalgia. There were wildflowers in old mason jars, paper streamers taped to the backs of wheelchairs, and lemon bars from a local bakery served with chipped teacups that somehow made it all more charming. I didn't wear a gown. I wore my best blouse, a pale blue one with lace cuffs that I had nearly donated years ago. Teresa had once called it outdated, but that afternoon Martin looked at me like I was the only colour in the world. He wore a light grey suit and a navy tie with tiny white birds on it. His hair was combed back, and his eyes, so often tired from caretaking, were electric. Martin said his vows without notes. "I've loved before," he said softly, "but this love is different. It's a quiet knowing, a holding of hands in the dark. Evelyn, I choose you in this chapter. Not because you're perfect, not because we're young, but because we still have pages left to write." When it was my turn, I surprised even myself. "I never thought I'd feel new again," I told him, voice shaking. "But somehow you looked at a woman who thought she was finished and saw a beginning." We didn't kiss with fireworks. We kissed like people who understood what it meant to lose and still choose to love. The applause was soft and joyful. Confetti made from torn-up poetry pages floated through the air. Someone wheeled out a record player, and before I knew it, we were dancing. Slow, swaying, careful. My cane rested nearby. My heart did not. I was no longer a forgotten guest in someone else's home. I was a bride, a wife, a woman who had found something sacred in the autumn of her life. Not an ending, but a rebirth. The wedding had been small, but someone had taken a photo, Martin holding my hand, both of us smiling beneath the cherry tree, and posted it on social media. The caption read, "Love has no expiration date." It was shared a few dozen times, then picked up by a local newspaper. "Couple in their 70s finds new beginning at Willow Creek." I didn't think much of it. I wasn't chasing attention. But one morning, 3 days after the article ran, I felt my old phone vibrate on the nightstand. Alex's mum, Teresa and I were wondering if we could come by to visit. Just one line. No emojis. No, "how are you?" Just that. My stomach twisted. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Martin was brushing crumbs off the breakfast table when he noticed the look on my face. "Something wrong?" I handed him the phone. He read it, then looked up, eyebrows raised slightly. "Well," he said gently, "that's something." But I didn't answer. I couldn't, because suddenly I wasn't in Willow Creek anymore. I was back in that guest room 6 months into my grief, hearing my son say, "We just can't afford you anymore." Hearing the front door click shut behind me as they left me at a place they found online in 15 minutes. Now they wanted to visit? Had they read the article and felt guilty? Had someone in the church group said something? Or was there another reason? Did they think I had money now? That marrying Martin somehow meant I was worth reconnecting with? The possibilities tangled in my mind like barbed wire. Martin watched me with his usual calm. "You don't have to answer today." I nodded slowly, pressing the phone to my chest. My hands trembled. For the first time in months, I didn't know what I wanted. Did I want to see my son again? To hear him say sorry? To feel like a mother, even if just for an hour? Or did I want to close that door for good and finally walk forward without looking back? The message sat there, unanswered. And so did the question behind it. Were they coming to visit? Or to reclaim something they thought they lost? They arrived on a Saturday afternoon. Teresa wore a crisp beige trench coat, her hair pinned tight, like she was going to a business meeting. Alex had on the same expression he always wore when something inconvenienced him. A mix of boredom and mild irritation masked behind polite eyes. Martin met them at the front entrance, smiling as he shook Alex's hand. "You must be the famous son," he said warmly. "We've heard a lot about you." Alex offered a stiff smile. "Likewise." Teresa glanced around the lobby, lips pressed tight, then turned to me. "Well," she said, "this place is cozier than I imagined." I ignored the tone and invited them into the small visitors' parlour. Martin brought tea, as he always did, and left us with a soft, "I'll give you some space." That's when the smiles dropped. "So," Teresa began, sitting upright, hands folded over her designer purse. "We saw the article. Very sweet. You and the facility owner. Congratulations." Alex cleared his throat. "Yeah, I didn't realize it was that serious, Mum. You didn't mention anything about, remarriage." "I wasn't aware I needed your permission," I replied, my voice calm. Teresa's smile returned, but this time it was colder. "Of course not. But we thought we should understand things. Legally, I mean." My heart sank. Alex leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You're living in a property that he owns, married to someone with full control over the entire facility. That's not nothing. We just think it's smart to make sure everything's protected." "Protected," I echoed. "For the family," Teresa added. "There's inheritance law, estate planning. I mean, if something were to happen to either of you." "Something like what, exactly?" I asked. Voice sharp now. They exchanged glances, clearly surprised I was pushing back. "Mum," Alex said, "we just want to make sure no one is taking advantage of you." That was it. The truth. They weren't here for me. They were here for what they thought they might lose. Martin re-entered then, as if on cue, and placed a small plate of lemon cookies on the table. "Everything all right in here?" he asked. Teresa smiled sweetly. "We were just discussing legal clarity." Martin's smile never wavered. "Ah, yes. Everyone loves clarity." I looked at him. This man who gave me back my dignity, and then at my son and his wife. And in that moment, I understood. They had come not to reconnect, but to calculate. And suddenly, I saw just how far apart we truly were. I let them talk. Let them wrap their questions in politeness, disguise their greed as concern, and their entitlement as clarity. I listened not because they deserved my silence, but because I needed to see, really see what they had come for. And they showed me. When the air went still and there was nothing left to mask behind half smiles, I placed my teacup down and folded my hands in my lap. I looked at Alex first, not as my son, not as my little boy in the superhero pajamas I once sewed myself, but as a man who had made a choice. Then I looked at Teresa. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, already moving on to the next financial form she might need. And then I spoke. Just one sentence. "I'm no longer your responsibility," I said, calm as a stone in a river. "But you are still a stain on my conscience." Teresa blinked. Alex's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain or justify. I had spent too many years doing that, trying to be enough, prove my worth, keep the peace. Not anymore. Martin, sensing the moment without a word, stepped into the doorway. Well then, he said gently. I think that's all for today. He didn't scold them. He didn't push. He simply gestured toward the exit with his usual grace. Alex stood slowly. Teresa didn't even look at me as she adjusted her purse strap. There were no hugs, no apologies, no final words. Only footsteps fading down the hallway. Only a door closing behind them. And when it did, I felt something inside me settle. Not bitterness, not triumph, just peace. Because I realized in that moment, I was no longer someone's forgotten mother, or silent tenant, or monthly expense. I was a woman who had been discarded and still chose to live. A woman who had been unwanted, and yet had never stopped wanting more. And now, I had it. On my terms. After Alex and Teresa left, Martin quietly made a call. He didn't pace. He didn't vent. He simply asked to meet with his longtime attorney the next day. I wasn't sure what he planned to do. Truthfully, I didn't need protection. Not from him. But I knew Martin. He was a man who left nothing uncertain. His love came, with calm hands and clear lines. When he returned from the meeting, he found me in the garden, trimming a tiny basil plant the staff had let me adopt. It's all taken care of, he said gently, sitting beside me. I didn't need to ask what he meant. He continued. My assets, the property, everything. I'd already set it up years ago. My estate is in a trust. Our marriage doesn't entitle you to ownership, which I think we both know is why they came. I nodded. The words didn't sting. They only confirmed what I already knew. I didn't marry you for anything to be mine, I said. I married you because you reminded me I still was someone. Martin smiled softly, folding his hands in his lap. And I didn't marry you because I was lonely. I married you because you looked me in the eye and didn't flinch. We sat for a moment in quiet reflection. There's no claim they can make, he added. No contest. No inheritance threats. The walls are solid. And yet, I said quietly, their love was paper thin. He looked at me, eyes full of quiet ache. I've seen this before, he murmured. Children chasing legacies, not memories. Hearts that grow up without roots. They inherit habits, not humanity. I breathed in the scent of basil and sun-warmed stone. They can have the legalities, I said. We have something they'll never understand. What's that? A bond built with nothing but kindness. No contracts. No expectations. No performance. No transaction. Just two people who had survived different storms and decided to rest beside one another in the same harbour. In the end, it wasn't about who owned what. It was about who held whom. And Martin held me. Not because the law said so, but because his heart had room. It started with a knock at the front office door. A young, local reporter, barely out of college by the looks of her, stood there with a notepad, a hopeful smile, and a question. Is it true one of your residents got married last month? To the owner? Martin chuckled. That's true. Would you like to meet her? I expected something small. A short piece on page 9 of the Millbrook Weekly, next to the gardening tips and grocery coupons. But after the interview, things moved fast. The story headline read, Love After 70. Millbrook couple finds joy at Willow Creek. They used a photo from our wedding, me in my lace-cuffed blouse, Martin holding my hand beneath the blooming cherry tree. The quote they highlighted, when life shuts one door, sometimes you have to build your own. Within a day, the article was shared across social media. Then a regional morning show picked it up. Then national outlets. Apparently, people were starving for something true. We were invited to do a video interview from the Willow Creek Garden. I wore a deep green cardigan and brushed my hair the way I used to before anniversary dinners. Martin stood beside me, his hand warm on my back. The reporter asked how it all began. I looked into the camera and said, I was left, by my son, by my family, not in a storm, but in silence. And I thought that would be the last chapter. I paused. But then someone saw me, not as a burden, not as a cost, but as a person. And I remembered I still had pages left to write. That line went viral. Within hours, my inbox filled with messages. Women from Kansas, Ohio, Arizona. Some were in their 60s, some in their 90s. Some had been abandoned. Others had walked away from their own sons, their own pain. Your story is my story. Thank you for reminding me I'm not invisible. I thought I was the only one. One message simply read, You made me believe in tomorrow. I sat in bed that night, reading them until my eyes blurred. Martin handed me a cup of tea. You didn't just survive, Evelyn, he said. You're helping others start over. And I realized he was right. I hadn't just opened a door for myself. I had opened it wide enough for others to walk through too. Not with noise, not with revenge, just with truth. And a quiet, unwavering kind of grace. Just when things felt still. When I thought the past had finally gone quiet, Teresa found her way back into the story. But not through phone calls, not through lawyers, through comments. Suddenly, under every article, every social media post about our story, a strange wave of negativity began to surface. Accounts with names like Caring Daughter 77 and Justice for Seniors USA started spreading whispers. That old man married her for sympathy clicks. This woman scammed her way into his will. Can no one see the manipulation here? She was dumped by her own son. Should tell you something. Clearly, a gold digger situation. The facility needs investigating. None of them used my name directly, but I recognized the voice behind the venom. Teresa had always been clever in her own way, never confrontational, always polished. This was her signature, passive aggression wrapped in concern. At first, I ignored it. But when one of the local news outlets reached out to fact-check allegations they'd seen online, Martin and I sat down together. He skimmed through the screenshots I'd gathered. His brow didn't furrow. His smile didn't drop. Instead, he laughed. A warm, amused chuckle that shook his shoulders. Well, he said, I guess it's official. We're controversial. I raised an eyebrow. You're not concerned? He turned to me and took my hands gently in his. Evelyn, I've owned this facility for 22 years. I've been called everything from a saint to a crook. But none of that matters. Then he looked at me. Really looked. When I look at you, I don't see gossip. I don't see scandal. I see a woman who survived heartbreak, built herself from the ground up, and still found room to love again. He paused. They can write what they want, but I know what's true. I see it in your eyes every single morning. I felt something release in my chest, some old instinct to defend myself, to prove I was worthy. But Martin didn't need proof. He just needed me. And Teresa. She could shout into the void all she wanted. But we had built something that couldn't be undone by comments and fake profiles. Because love, real love, doesn't answer to noise. It answers only to truth. The call came 3 weeks after the online smear campaign fizzled out. I recognized Teresa's voice before she said her name. sweetened, cautious, polished. Like someone preparing for a job interview she didn't believe she had to attend. "Hi, Evelyn," she began, skipping the word mom like it was inconvenient. "I was just going through some old papers and realized the house in Providence. It hasn't been sold, has it?" There it was. The real reason for the call. She didn't ask how I was, or about the wedding, or about her children's grandmother, who she had once promised to care for. Just the house. The little white bungalow with blue shutters and creaky floorboards. The home I raised Alex in. The one I scrubbed clean with tired hands, painted over heartbreak in, and kept warm with second-hand quilts and prayers whispered into empty rooms. "No, it hasn't been sold," I replied calmly. I heard the sharp inhale on the other end of the line, a calculation beginning. "Oh, well, maybe we can talk about that. If it's just sitting there, it might be smart to liquidate. There are taxes, maintenance. It could help the family. Maybe even—" "I already signed it over," I said, cutting her off. A pause, cold and wide. "What do you mean?" "It's no longer in my name," I said. "I donated it to a non-profit. They're converting it into a transitional housing shelter for women leaving domestic violence situations." Another pause. This one full of disbelief. "You gave it away?" "Yes," I said. "Because that house raised a survivor. It deserves to shelter more." The silence grew sharp. "That house could have been part of Alex's inheritance," she finally muttered. "That house," I said, my voice steady, "was never about money. It was about safety and healing and warmth." I took a breath. "And it will be those things again. But not for you. And not for Alex." There was no reply. Only the line going dead. I set the phone down with a strange calm blooming in my chest. Because for the first time in decades, that house, the one filled with memories of sacrifice, would now echo with new stories. Not of abandonment, but of return. Of women who had nowhere to go and finally found the door open. And for the first time in my life, I had closed that door behind me with peace. It was just past midnight when the phone rang. The hallway was dark. The soft hum of the night shift radio buzzed from the front desk. Martin was asleep, breathing gently beside me. The kind of peace that only comes after a life rebuilt. I nearly didn't answer, but something, curiosity, old instinct, or maybe just habit, pulled me out of bed. "Alex." Incoming call? I stared at the name for a long time before swiping the screen. His voice cracked the silence like a match striking too close to dry paper. "Mom," he rasped. One word, but already broken. "Are you okay?" I asked, cautious. He sniffled. His breathing was uneven. Then the words poured out, fast and heavy, like stones he'd carried for too long. "Teresa left me, packed up and flew to her sister's. She said I was too obsessed with what might be ours, and not enough with what actually is. I lost my job last month, tried to hide it. I thought if I could just figure something out." He stopped. "Everything's gone. The house, the car, everything. And I keep thinking about you, about what we did, what I said, what I didn't say." I didn't interrupt, not once. I don't know. I thought maybe we could fix things. Maybe you could come back. Or I could visit. We could talk." He paused, then added, "Is there any way we could get back to how it was?" I leaned against the wall and looked out the window, into the moonlit garden where Martin had once asked me to be his wife. The same garden where I said yes, not just to him, but to myself. And I answered him, Finally. No, Alex, I said quietly. We can't. He was silent. Because, I continued, you didn't lose anything. You never had it. Not really. Not my love. Not my trust. Not my home. You inherited my sacrifices. Not my spirit. And when I needed you most, you chose comfort over compassion. He let out a choked breath. I didn't know what I was doing. You didn't care what you were doing, I replied. He sobbed then, and I listened, not with anger, but with finality. You made a choice, Alex, and so did I. I chose a man who saw me. I chose peace. I chose not to live out the rest of my life waiting to be wanted. Another long silence. I'm sorry, he whispered. I hope you are, I said. Because this time, I'm not coming back. Then I ended the call, and for the first time in years, I felt no guilt, no ache, just a stillness that tasted like freedom. The frost had settled lightly on the garden windows that morning, tracing delicate lines like nature's handwriting. Outside, the grass sparkled in the early winter light. The trees stood bare but proud, no longer in bloom, but still standing. Martin and I sat in the sunroom, often called the winter garden by the staff. It had become our favorite place, a quiet refuge with creaky wicker chairs, faded cushions, and sunbeams that cut through the chill like old friends. He reached for my hand, his fingers still warm despite the cold. I never thought I'd find love at this age, he said softly, his eyes twinkling behind thick rimmed glasses. I smiled. And I never thought I'd find respect, I replied. That made him pause. You didn't have that before? I looked out through the glass, where a single red cardinal perched on a branch like a drop of summer refusing to surrender. I had duty. I had routine. I had people who needed me. But I don't think I had many who saw me. Not like you do. Martin nodded, understanding without pushing. We sat like that for a while. Two weathered souls, not running from time, but sitting comfortably inside it. People think aging is a collapse, he said after a moment. That we slow down, fade out, lose meaning. I chuckled gently. People think too small. He turned to me again. You didn't collapse. You rose. I looked at him, really looked, and said, so did you. What we had wasn't frantic or passionate in the way young people think love should be. It didn't come with fireworks or wild promises. It came with trust, with knowing silence, with steady hands that held instead of demanded. We weren't chasing something lost. We were building something new. In our winter garden, my heart felt like summer, warm, alive, in bloom. And I realized that love, true love, wasn't bound to youth. It was bound to choice. To choosing someone who listens when the world is loud. To choosing peace over performance. To choosing yourself and being chosen back. We were old, but we were just beginning. It was a quiet Thursday when we finalized the paperwork. No rush, no drama. Just a lawyer with kind eyes, a few crisp forms, and two signatures written in hands weathered by time, but firm with certainty. Martin and I had decided weeks earlier what we wanted. No houses passed down to those who once walked away. No savings guarded by silence or fear. Instead, everything. His estate, my modest savings, the house in his name, and the trust tied to his business would go to a foundation we'd helped build, the Hearthlight Fund. It would serve elderly women who had been abandoned, mistreated, or simply forgotten, just like I once was, just like many still are. Martin, sitting beside me in the small legal office, took my hand as we waited for the last form to print. We've had a rare thing, he said softly. A second beginning when most people are told they've reached the end. I nodded, eyes damp. Then let's make sure we're not the last. He smiled. We should leave behind more than memories. We should leave hope. Later that evening, we walked through the halls of Willow Creek. The sun was beginning to set, casting gold across the tile floor. We passed Doris in the library, humming to herself as she traced her fingers across old playbills. Arthur was scribbling in his notebook near the window. We've made it, I whispered. Martin squeezed my hand. But others haven't yet, he said. That night, as we sat on the porch with blankets over our knees and tea cooling beside us, I turned to him. This world can be cold, I said. But we leave behind our warmth now. Even after we're gone. He nodded. This, he said, is the real legacy. And I thought of all the women who would one day find a clean bed, a safe space, a listening ear, because two forgotten souls had dared to love again. And then shared that love outward. We weren't trying to change the world, just light a single lamp in the dark. One flame, one name, one story at a time. It was the first warm day of spring, and Willow Creek had never looked more alive. Paper lanterns swung gently from tree branches. Folding tables overflowed with homemade pies, lemonade in chipped pitchers, and simple dishes made with care. The sound of laughter floated through the air, soft, weathered, and absolutely beautiful. We called it the Spring Jubilee, and it wasn't just a party. It was a celebration of survival, of rebirth, of people who were told they were finished, only to find a second beginning. Residents wore flower crowns made by the staff. One of the nurses played guitar in the courtyard. Doris did a dramatic reading from A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Arthur read a poem he wrote just for the occasion, titled, We Are Still Here. But the most beautiful part, the new arrivals. Women like me, once abandoned, once silenced, now slowly finding their voices again. Our foundation, the Hearthlight Fund, had helped the first 5, moving over the last month. Some still looked unsure, blinking in the sunlight as if afraid it might not last. Others smiled shyly. And then there were those who dared to dance. Martin and I sat side by side near the garden wall, watching it all. Children from the community had come with flowers and songs. Local vendors donated cupcakes. No reporters this time. No headlines. Just life being lived. Martin reached for my hand, as he always did. He turned to me and whispered, You know, I've been alive a long time. And I've loved. And I've lost. But never in my life did I think I'd say this. I looked at him, eyebrows raised. You, he said, are my family. Not because I married you. Not because we signed anything. But because you've become the home I thought I'd never find again. My throat tightened. And you, I said softly. You gave me something I didn't believe existed anymore. He smiled. A second chance? No, I said, eyes welling up. A place. A space to exist without apologizing. To be chosen without needing to earn it. We sat quietly for a moment, surrounded by music, joy, and the rustle of spring leaves. Then I said it. Words I had carried like a seed for so many years. I've come home, Martin. For the first time, I'm really home. And in that place of laughter and lilacs, of hands held and hurts healed, I finally understood. Family isn't made by blood. It's made by the ones who stay, who see you, who choose you, and who remind you every single day that you were never too old to be loved right.